at NAB 2016 at the IABM TV studios. We're really privileged here to have one of the luminaries in the industry, somebody that 2 or 3 years ago came into the industry and actually has transformed it. He predicted that there was going to be a lot of change in the industry, and that change has happened, and he's turned Harris Broadcast into Imagine Communications, and it is very much a leading light in the industry, taking the transformation. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate that.
So the rise of new business models and the impact on the competitive dynamics of broadcasters, service providers, and other content owners. Can you talk to us about that? What's happening in the market?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think that the trends that whether you were an ambassador of some of the trends that we were talking about a couple of years ago, or certainly a fast follower, I think the reality is my fundamental focus and strategy is how do we make today's media broadcaster and TV network competitive, and how do we ensure that the way in which they're moving, managing, and monetizing video content is such that they can continue to compete in the future. And the only way that we know that they're going to be able to successfully do that is if they begin to adapt new ways and new architectures that can allow them to be more agile, more flexible, be able to bring new revenue generating applications to the market much quicker, and fundamentally that architecture is IP. And it's great to see that the industry is beginning to spend more time understanding the benefits of IP, and we're certainly investing significantly behind that initiative.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that for a minute. Our research a few years ago, we asked our end users in our end user surveys, how important is it that these products from all different suppliers work together? And at the time it was way down. Now in the last 2-3 years it's right at the top of the list. So interoperability is the word, and you have been instrumental in creating a group called AIMS. Do you want to explain what that's about?
Sure. Yeah, I think it certainly is going to serve as the foundation for which the key suppliers in this industry that are going to be innovating around IP rally around. So I'm really excited about it. At the end of the day, it's a lot easier as an equipment supplier competing when everyone is on the same page than when we're competing about different philosophies and different ways in which companies can innovate around different ideas. And so I think AIMS is going to be fantastic. The next initiative that we got to focus on is how do we get to a common set of APIs? Because now that you get IP, as the common protocol, now you got to figure out, okay, how do we establish a common set of APIs to where, whether we're developing, our customers are developing, or third-party application developers are writing, specific applications to accelerate revenue initiatives, that we'll be able to accelerate the pace of those revenue sources.
I mean, that's really exciting. I think we've seen in the last 2 years various initiatives and lots of different collaborative groups, and certainly we're very excited at IABM with what.
Well, and I appreciate the endorsement that you guys gave AIMS this morning. That was great.
Yeah, and that whole protocol really is for our members and the industry at large to be able to look at AIMS and any other initiative and make sure that that's something they want to sign up to, because it meets the needs of the industry. And I think you're following an open standards approach, which I think is really important.
Well, we've certainly taken a very proactive initiative in what we're doing with the IT players. We sort of introduced a lot of the traditional IT infrastructure players like Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Microsoft into this industry, and they certainly have a lot of interest in how they can, this is a net new growth and market segment for them. They historically really haven't participated because a lot of the the solutions were proprietary hardware software technologies that were tethered together, and now they get now the industry actually gets an opportunity to take advantage of the power of innovation and the billions of dollars that they're spending on certainly hardware, server storage and compute platforms. Well, at the same time, you look at what Microsoft is doing with Azure. I mean, they spent billions of dollars building out, a 6 nines reliable, cloud. Now, maybe that cloud is not for everyone, but I think for smaller broadcasters who are looking at, how they can begin to move into this new world, it may be the perfect thing. What we're doing with Disney, that they're actually leveraging a lot of the internal data center and virtualized cloud environment assets that they have to move their legacy network operations to an IP virtualized environment with Imagine. But I think it's going to depend on the company.
Yeah.
We certainly want to be in a position that, regardless if you're moving some part of your network functions to a private, public, or a hybrid cloud environment, that you can count on Imagine to have spent the time and energy to have tested in those kinds of virtualized environments.
I mean, it's very interesting. Again, this morning at our conference, we showed the fact that 88% of the people who responded to that thought interoperability was a very key factor, very, very important, but only 1/3 of them knew how to get there. And
Well, I think people are afraid. I think you're absolutely right. I was on the panel that you guys hosted the other day with Avid and Telestream, and I think the truth of it is, and I tend to subscribe to Truth Serum, is that there's a lot of folks that are really kind of scared about this transition. What's been happening for the last decade has kind of been working. People knew how to deploy technology, and the broadcasters knew how to monetize, and then all of a sudden you had these new internet players that began to launch new services and new ways to get content, and you look at what YouTube is producing every single day from an amateur perspective, and holy cow, I mean, it's pretty disruptive when you think about what it's doing to the monetization aspects of our traditional customers. So I'm all focused on, how do I ensure that you're going to make money tomorrow? How do I make sure that the NBCs and ABCs and Disneys and Fox and Al Jazeera's of the world are in a position that they can compete? And that's why we've been investing as heavily as we have in a lot of these new technologies.
Yeah, you certainly called it a few years back, and it's certainly come true. Do you think there'll be more consolidation in the market? Do you think there'll be more?
It was interesting because that was one of the conversations and questions that was brought up by Joe Zeller. Specifically to Lewis and I, as to hey, is M&A, is more M&A, more or less M&A in the future, and I think as you move more and more to a software-defined, sort of workflow and networking architecture, it makes it harder to acquire companies because unless those companies are adjacent companies who are developing software that are complementary to your software stack,
Yes.
and where you sit in the workflow, it makes it more challenging. We're certainly not going to go backwards and acquire proprietary hardware platforms. So I certainly see, personally, a lot of opportunities for us to continue to grow in ways in which certain companies are laser focused on a particular part of the network. But there's not a lot of large, at the end of the day, here's Imagine at, $350 million, and we're still small, and we're one of the larger companies.
Yeah,
and, Gates Air's, doing well, but, the reality is there's no billion-dollar company in our space, and so scale, I think, is going to become more and more of a requirement, and figuring out how to grow in an industry that's not net growing, especially when you're going from hardware to software. When you go from hardware to software, you're losing all the hardware revenue.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'd rather be a smaller company with 80-90% margins than a company that has to manage E&O, and a lot of people don't talk about the challenges that companies have when you're dealing with a lot of hardware, and the pace at which change is occurring. You got a lot of excess and obsolete hardware that these companies have to deal with. Well, that's one key benefit that as a software company you're not dealing with, and I think that our customers don't want us to deal with that. I think they want to be in a position where they can acquire and source, whether it's through us or directly themselves, hardware platforms that they can swap out whenever they want, however they want, and they want to look to us as providing intellectual property relative to how the network needs to be managed going forward. So I'd like to say that there's a dozen IABM, members that are perfect fits for us, and if there is, they need to be knocking on our door, because we certainly are trying to find. I think it's in our best interest to find a way to make it easier for our customers. Like, we got to make it easier, and the days of buying 15 different black boxes to perform a function, I think, are behind us. And I think it's going to be interesting for your members, our members, and the industry over the next 3 to 5 years. But I certainly see an inflection point sometime in the mid to late 2018 timeframe where I think you're going to see more companies deploying next generation IP and SDN networks than the former.
Yes, we're seeing the trend. It's a few percentage points every time we take the survey, but it's definitely on the march. And nimble, quick input, output, quick change is going to be the name of the game, I think.
By the way, I think that for entrepreneurial companies, I think it's going to be easier for them to actually innovate in this world than it was when they had to build a black box. And so, while there may not be an overabundance of technology companies that right now today fit the profile, I do think that over time, the existing membership and new membership is going to create companies that do fit the profile, because they're going to have to focus on becoming a more software-oriented company that is, focused on a world that's going to be defined by the internet.
Yes.
I mean, at the end of the day, the internet is going to define, the future, and the internet equals IP.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. So this has been IABM TV for Charlie Vogt, the CEO of Imagine Communications at NAB 2016. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Have a great show.
And you.
All right.
Okay. Very good.
All right. We acted like